of the hardest things that I find to research about is animal abuse, animal vivisection. I find it really impossible to look at the pictures. Well, I mean, I can do stuff, but it really haunts me and everything, because I just allow. It's hard to explain, but I found this article and I just want to read it out. I just feel need to read it out. If I lose it, I'll lose it, you know what I mean? Whatever, I just feel it. Science as the guide to the only authentic form of knowledge. Bernard was one of the earliest exponents of scientism, although he seems to have been only dimly aware of the direction in which he was travelling. He was not led to vivisection by a prior belief in scientism. He wandered into scientism as a way of defending vivisection against its critics. Here is Bernard invoking scientism to defend experiments on conscious, suffering animals. The physiologist is not an ordinary man. He is a scientist possessed and absorbed by the scientific idea that he pursues. He doesn't hear the cries of the animals. He does not see their flowing blood. He sees nothing but his idea and is aware of nothing but organisms which conceal from him the problems he is wishing to solve. Scientism is not science, and scientific statements are not scientific statements. Bernard's assertion that, quote, science permits us to vivisect animals, end of quote, can survive none of the tests by which science evaluates a proposition. It does not describe a phenomenon that can be observed and measured. It cannot be empirically tested, and it cannot be falsified either empirically or logically. It is, in fact, a statement of values, not a statement of fact. It carries all the scientific weight of a proposition like, quote, God has commanded me to slay the infidels, end of quote, or, quote, God wants me to kill abortion doctors, end of quote. Although he seems not to have known it, as we shall see in a moment, self-awareness was not Claude Bernard's strong suit. Bernard was making a confession of religious faith that substitutes science for God. Belief in the supremacy of knowledge over all other values, including compassion and morality, is itself a value. Scientism allows scientists to cloak their own personal unexamined motivations in the mantle of science. The unacknowledged personal motivation behind Bernard's passion for vivisection was glimpsed by Dr. George Hagen, a British physician who worked with him for a while before becoming disgusted and quitting. In a letter addressed to the London Morning Post, Hagen described Bernard's attitude. The idea of the good of humanity was simply out of the question and would be laughed at. The great aim being to keep up with or get ahead of one's contemporaries in science, even at the price of an incalculable amount of torture needlessly and iniquitously inflicted on the poor animals. The frustrated professor of medicine was pursuing knowledge for the sake of his bruised ego, with no thought of doing good and no regard for the suffering he inflicted. The man they had said wasn't good enough to teach medicine was now acclaimed as a hero of science who knew more than the most respected medical professors in the world, and he owed it all to vivisection. Death of the art of science. Some of Magendy's and Bernard's victims were elderly cavalry horses who had lived through wars in the service of France, only to be rewarded by an agonizing death in the laboratory. No doubt their fate was similar to the horror inflicted on the other horses by Bernard's students. He described it. On August 8th, 1863, the Paris correspondent of the Times of London reported, quote, "At the veterinary college at Alfort, a wretched horse is periodically given up to a group of students to experimentalize upon. They tie him down and torture him for hours, the operations being graduated in such a manner that 60 and even more may be performed before death ensues. Sometimes an eyeless, hoofless, eviscerated beast was shot if the experiments had not already killed it. At other times the students wandered off when their curiosity was satisfied and left their victim to the knacker, someone who buys old, injured or exhausted livestock, slaughters them and sells the meat and skin. But their favourite victims were dogs." Again, Dr. George Hogan. "I think the saddest sight I have ever witnessed was when dogs were brought up from the cellar to the laboratory. They seemed seized with horror as soon as they smelt the air. Of the place, divining apparently their approaching fate. They would make friendly advances to each of the 3 or 4 persons present. As far as eyes, ears and tail could make a mute appeal for mercy eloquent, they tried it in vain." And the quote. You know, it just destroys me. You know, fucking hearing about this and seeing it and shit. I just cannot believe it's soul death. You know, people who do this, they're soul dead. There's another, right? Like they're talking about how the animals would struggle. The struggle they did. A doctor who watched Magendy work described a dog's desperate efforts to escape his torment. Magendy, alas, performed experiments in public, and sadly too often at the Collège de France. I remember once, among other instances, the case of a poor dog, the roots of whose spinal nerves he was about to expose. Twice did the dog, all bloody and mutilated, escape his implacable knife, and twice did I see him put his paws around Magendy's neck and lick his face. Do you know what I mean? And so these, like I say, you know, these people that do this have lost their soul, have lost all kinds of feelings. You watch children with animals, and they're open to animals, right? And these people, to be able to do that, it shows you the evil of the education, so-called education system, that can drive out all feeling for other beings, right? I just thought that I would put myself through this reading it and then just show you the emotion that I feel when I'm reading it and when I'm looking and researching all this stuff.